Welcome to Unknown, where we explore the bizarre, the mysterious, and sometimes unsettling. And today, we're heading back into space.
We're joined by our special guest, Dr. Avi Loeb, Harvard professor of science, on the new disclosure by the Trump administration after recent controversy and a past president mentioning that aliens could be real.
Are aliens real?
They're real, but I haven't seen them, and they're not being kept in... what is it?
Area 51?
Area 51. There's no underground facility unless there's this enormous conspiracy and they hid it from the President of the United States.
Dr. Loeb, with the comments that came out from President Barack Obama and then the response from President Trump, what was your first reaction when you heard the president say that aliens do exist?
Well, that they must have seen evidence that we have not seen that indicates some bizarre objects or events. Of course, the question is, how convincing is this evidence? Well, if it makes two presidents talk about it, it must be highly classified and quite intriguing. And of course, they wouldn't mention it if it could have been interpreted as human-made technologies. And so the fundamental question is, what is it about? And one way to figure it out is if both the Pentagon, the intelligence agencies will reveal some of this evidence. Is it in the form of imagery, let's say from US government satellites, maybe some materials that were collected? We just don't know. There were reports about it in the past, testimonies at the House of Representatives, but we haven't seen the evidence. Where is the beef? We otherwise cannot judge it for ourselves. It all depends on how robust is the evidence. And for that, we need the tools of science to figure it out.
Doctor, we've seen some of these videos. I'm thinking of the ones from fighter pilots seeing these little dots on the screen zooming back and forth almost like a water bug. What's your take on that? Can that be anything from planet Earth?
Well, the evidence that was disclosed so far is not very convincing. I mean, we don't know the distance to the objects we're seeing. Therefore, we don't know their velocities, accelerations, and and words are not enough. We need, a picture is worth 1,000 words as long as it's of scientific quality. In particular, if they have materials, it's relatively straightforward to figure out whether the material came from outside the solar system, based on the isotope abundances. And so there is a lot of work that can be done as long as we are provided with the data. It's possible that some of the information was delivered to corporations outside government with the hope that maybe it can be used for the benefit of our side in conflicts. But, the problem is that it needs to be opened up to scientific inquiry before we can actually assess how significant it is. And my hope is that this announcement by President Trump will lead to a better assessment. And, there is an incentive for the Pentagon, the intelligence agencies, to keep it classified and hidden from view, because basically what they're saying is they're not doing their job if they can't identify all the objects in the sky. We know about the Chinese spy balloon that took a while to figure out. And, there is always a remote chance that anything we see belongs to adversarial nations. And for those reasons, they might want to keep it classified. Also, the sensors being used to retrieve that kind of data may be classified. But if we deal with information from 50 years ago, for example, that is not relevant to the present day battlefield. The technologies we use now are much more superior to what has been used back then. And if there was anything extraterrestrial, that should be examined openly. And the same holds for anything that is absolutely beyond the performance envelope of human-made technologies.
Avi, I know too, with the Congressional UAP Task Force led by Representative Anna Paulina Luna, that you have been an expert for and certainly working with her.
For too long, the issue of unidentified anomalous phenomena, commonly known as UAPs, has been shrouded in secrecy, stigma, and in some cases, outright dismissal. Today, I want to state clearly that this is not science fiction or creating speculation. This is about national security, government accountability, and the American people's right to the truth.
If we do get some traction here where there is evidence, physical evidence, that would be available for our scientific teams to look at, what would be some of the markers and the evidence inside of these physical objects that scientists such as yourself will be looking for to determine if they have an extraterrestrial origin or certainly not of this earth?
Well, first, I salute the visionary work that Representative Luna is doing, and she's really responsible for leading the effort on the age of disclosure that led to the statement by President Trump. And we obviously should take full advantage of that statement. And to your question, we need to figure out, first, if we're talking about imagery, we need to know the distance to the objects we are looking at, the velocities, acceleration. Then it's relatively straightforward to compare those to available human-made technologies and figure out that if we are dealing with something beyond this world. But if there are materials, it's even easier. There are lots of tests that can be done in the laboratory on materials. Now, if we have retrieved any technology that is beyond what we possess, it might take a while to figure it out because it may use science beyond what we currently understand. You know, we are pretty ignorant because we had only one century of modern science and technology. And whoever sent those devices might have had the benefit of thousands, millions, or even billions of years of the science and technology, and who knows where we will be in the next century in that context. So there is a lot of room for things that we can't figure out easily. But the first thing is to check whether we're dealing with outliers, things that cannot be explained by human-made technologies and materials that did not originate in the solar system. All the material in the solar system came from the same reservoir, and it has very distinct characteristics in terms of its isotopic abundances. And I would be delighted to assist the evaluation process if there will be, for example, a board that reviews the data, the information. You know, I can engage in the analysis of that information, data, and what it means, but also do some follow-up research that would help government, the Congress, Pentagon, or the intelligence agencies reveal what stands behind that data.
Doctor, do you think that, let me take you back a little bit, if the government did know these things already, if we had a crash site like Roswell, New Mexico, would they be capable of keeping this secret for decade after decade?
Well, I would find it unlikely. I would imagine that there would be leaks. I mean, there were people talking about some of the past incidents, but there was never conclusive evidence presented to demonstrate the case. That's why this subject was in the margins. Now, it's possible that whatever was found in any crash site was delivered to corporations outside government, and they kept it to themselves because they get paid for the analysis and they prefer not to reveal it. I would think that having high-quality scientists engaged in the analysis would be of great importance because these corporations are not necessarily the places where you would find the best scientists right now. And also the government is not a scientific organization. It's pretty much concerned with national security. That's a very different mission that is targeting human-made technologies. So they need to know what our adversarial nations are producing, and it is not very different than what we are producing, perhaps inferior. So if we encounter something well above what we possess, we would have a hard time figuring it out unless you engage with the brightest minds in science. And, in that case, I would think that having scientists engage in the analysis, the interpretation, and what to do next would be essential.
The president's daughter-in-law, Laura Trump, she said on her podcast this week, gave us a little bit of insight, at least to the thinking on the president's inner circle, that President Trump had a speech ready to address Americans that we're not alone.
There is some speech that he has that I guess at the right time, and I don't know when the right time is, he's going to break out and talk about, and it has to do with maybe some sort of extraterrestrial life, so to speak.
Do you think Americans can handle the truth?
Oh, definitely. I think, we're not children, most of us. In fact, if you were to discover a tennis ball thrown by a neighbor in your backyard, you would not hide that fact from your family members at the dinner table, because the same neighbor might visit at the front door or have implications for the future of your family. So I think it's really important for us to recognize, if we live in a cosmic neighborhood where we have neighbors, to recognize that, because our set of priorities will change. You never know whether visitors are friendly or hostile. Maybe some of them might be serial killers. And so there is another priority, which is to defend the planet if we happen to encounter alien technology. For all these reasons, I think it's important for us to be open about it, and rather than hide this fact. I mean, we know what happened when the Vatican tried to suppress the dissemination of the result that Galileo Galilei concluded that based on his telescope, that he looked at the moons of Jupiter, he realized that the Earth is not at the center of the universe, but they put him in house arrest and suppressed that information. And only in 1992, 350 years after he died, they announced that he was right. And of course, the Earth continued to move around the sun, irrespective of what the Vatican did.
Are there some good arguments to be made for not releasing information like that?
I don't think there is a good argument in the long term. I do think that it would be really nice if President Trump were to include in his State of the Union, either the one that is upcoming this Tuesday or in a future State of the Union address, a statement about the state of the universe. And that includes whether we have a neighbor. And of course, if we do have a neighbor and the neighbor is visiting our backyard, we might want to visit their backyard. And the answer to Enrico Fermi's question, where is everybody, might be in that case right here. And so that would have huge implications, both in terms of how we plan ahead. We might be inspired to travel in between the stars as well. And it will change our religious and philosophical beliefs about our place in the universe. You know, it would mean that for anyone religious, that God has more than one child. And maybe our siblings are more accomplished than we are. So that would inspire us to do better.
Good stuff, Doctor. If you don't mind, we have a quick break here. A couple more questions on the back end. Get your thoughts on, are we alone and are we being visited, and much more. Stay with us on Unknown.
Welcome back to Unknown. We're discussing UAP disclosure and the most recent comments by the White House on if we could know the truth about what these things are. Joining us is our special guest, Dr. Avi Loeb, Harvard professor of science. Avi, all this talk about extraterrestrials, I know there's also some speculation that could these be time travelers from a different period in human development, a more advanced civilization coming back to the past to visit us? What's your thought on that take?
Well, as far as we know, based on the physics that we understand, there is no possibility for time travel. That requires having produced negative mass or negative energy, which introduces a lot of problems in physics. Because, for example, you will get situations where someone will go back in time and change circumstances that led to their birth, which is a logical inconsistency. We don't know how to make negative mass, negative energy to allow that. So it's purely speculative, but in principle, it's possible. I would not rule it out because, we don't understand how to unify quantum mechanics and gravity. And what I said is based on gravity as formulated by Albert Einstein without quantum mechanics. So there may be a possibility of doing that, in a quantum gravity context that we are just not familiar with. Indeed, it's possible that there was a more advanced civilization that that preceded us. We haven't found any evidence for computer terminals in archaeological digs. And we don't know if such a thing existed. We do see the pyramids that are quite unusual, but it's possible that the only thing that survived from that civilization, since it was, I don't know, hundreds of millions of years ago, the only thing that survived were objects orbiting the Earth, because the rest was basically mixed up through geological activity and we can't really find it. That's a possibility. We should be open to it. But it's also quite possible that we're visited, because it takes less than 1 billion years for our 1970s technologies in the form of the Voyager spacecraft to cross the entire Milky Way galaxy. Voyager will be on the opposite side of the Milky Way galaxy in 1 billion years. And most of the stars in the Milky Way galaxy formed billions of years before the sun. And so any civilization near them would have preceded us by billions of years. There was plenty of time for their gadgets, like even with a primitive technology like Voyager, to reach us by now. And moreover, they may have developed new technologies that allow them to traverse those distances over a much shorter time. So there is no problem reaching us from the other side of the Milky Way galaxy, where there are altogether 100 billion stars like the sun, and about 10% of them have a planet the size of the Earth, roughly the same separation. So I would say that believing that we are at the top of the food chain in the Milky Way galaxy is arrogant. And I strongly believe that there is a more accomplished space entrepreneur that existed in the Milky Way galaxy that is more accomplished than Elon Musk since the Big Bang 13.8 billion years ago.
Doctor, what's your guess then? If we are being visited, why are they just here kind of watching us and not communicating with us?
Well, either we are not particularly interesting to them. Just imagine walking on a sidewalk and you don't pay attention to the ants in the cracks of the pavement. They might have a completely different agenda. Another possibility is that they communicate in a very different way that we don't understand, because our experiences on Earth are very limited. And think of us as AI systems that are trained on a limited data set, and what they are doing or they are thinking or they are communicating through is at a completely different level that is beyond us. We can't really detect it because our physics is not sufficiently developed. And moreover, they are thinking in different ways than we do. So for us to second guess what they're thinking is really presumptuous. I mean, think of it as a date with a dating partner that you don't really know, that came from another star. I mean, that our imagination is just very limited. And I would highly advise not to pay attention to science fiction movies or scripts, because, again, they were crafted based on what we are experiencing here on Earth, whereas all bets are off when you deal with the vast expanses of space and time in the Milky Way galaxy.
Avi, if you could talk about, too, do you have any hope that artificial intelligence would help in our understanding of what these things are, especially in light of the president's recent order on disclosure for these files?
Well, the benefit of AI is that it can go through vast data sets. So one thing that can be done is if there is a secure AI agent that is being used by the Pentagon, for example, or the intelligence agencies, it can go through all the information that is in numerous files and organize it in a way that would give a coherent picture, an executive summary that is easier to digest. But in terms of the evidence itself, that has to come from sensors or satellites or detectors or materials retrieved, and that is the key. Okay, so what the AI can help with is the analysis of all of that, if it's really very large. And also AI can look at the data that is highly classified. There is no need to sign it on an NDA, non-disclosure agreement. And so in that sense, it can do the analysis without involving humans that need the security clearance. So these are the benefits of AI, but at the end of the day, it will be humans who will decide what this means for our future. and also filter out anything to do with national security from other the evidence that I'm interested in. I don't care about anything that was made by humans. Is boring as far as I'm concerned, and I really want to know if there is another civilization out there.
Avi, too, with the discussion in the scientific community, I know your work with the Galileo Project, and then, of course, the Soul Foundation with their meeting of scientific experts with how we discuss UAPs and the phenomenon. Can you talk about, has there been a breakthrough, at least in the last 10 years, of how we're discussing these things? Are scientific experts taking this more seriously? Or, as you have alluded to in the past, that there's so much more work to be done with taking this seriously and not being dogmatic about it?
Well, most of the revelations came in congressional hearings, but we still don't have the most conclusive data or evidence that exists that could be responsible for what former President Obama and President Trump were talking about, because President Trump said that it's highly classified.
Barack Obama said that aliens are real. Have you seen any evidence of non-human visitors to Earth?
Well, he gave classified information. He's not supposed to be doing that.
So aliens are real?
Well, I don't know if they're real or not. I can tell you he gave classified information. He's not supposed to be doing that. He made a big mistake. He took it out of classified information. No, I don't have an opinion on it. I never talk about it.
The best is yet to come in that context. Now, if there are unusual objects around the Earth that visit us every now and then, and these visits may be rarely noticed, we can still find them in the future. And that's the purpose of the Galileo project that I'm leading. We built 3 observatories to monitor the sky, looking at millions of objects every year and analyzing the data with artificial intelligence to figure out if there are any outliers that go beyond the performance envelopes of known human-made technologies. And that is the kind of scientific work that can continue. But if the government already has some intriguing data simply because they have huge resources to monitor the sky and the oceans, and they've done that for decades, we better know about it in order to plan how to move to do better research in the future. And I'm very much in favor of a partnership between government and science in this context. The last time there was a major partnership of that nature was during the Manhattan Project, but that was for a different reason. And so here I think this will be a far more important, crucial step forward for humanity. And the United States should be at the forefront of that.
And Doctor, I thought I read in one of your papers that we're about to spend tens of millions of dollars studying more distant stars and planets. But wouldn't it be ironic if we already have a lot of those answers right here on Earth already?
Yeah, in fact, the astronomy community decided as its highest priority to invest more than $10 billion in the so-called Habitable World Observatory that will, within 2 decades or so, search for the chemical fingerprints of microbes in the atmospheres of exoplanets, planets around other stars. And of course, if you find oxygen, methane, carbon dioxide, water in those atmospheres, it will not be conclusive because the same molecules might be produced by geological processes. My point is we should hedge our bets and invest similar levels of funding in the search for intelligence out there, because when you go on a date, you can either aim low or aim high. And while my colleagues are aiming to find microbes as the dating partners, I think we should aim high. And even if microbes are far more abundant, like mediocre dating partners, they are far more abundant than high-level dating partners, I would rather aim at finding a more advanced, a more intelligent civilization out there, because it can bring us to a better place. And also, it will inspire us to do better in terms of engaging in interstellar travel, in terms of learning about new science and technology. And they might be easier to find, because if they reach us, we don't need to look very far. And so there is this filter of whoever was able to reach us, to bridge across the vast expanse of space, tens of thousands of light years across the Milky Way galaxy. If they manage to traverse that before we left the solar system, then it means that they're very accomplished. So that's a filter that brings to our attention the most successful students in our class of intelligent civilizations. And sort of like the Darwinian selection, the fittest survive among the stars. Those are the technological civilizations that were sufficiently advanced, that developed the means to leave their planet, because ultimately we will have to do that, and not just to go to Mars, because Mars is just another rock that is not necessarily better than the rock we are sitting on right now, but in fact build a space platform that can carry us to the stars. And when we see others doing that, it will inspire us to do the same and save humanity for the long-term future.
Hey, we got some dating advice here from Avi Loeb, too.
Always,
How great is that?
Always an expert on multiple topics.
Love it.
So important there. Well, Avi, thank you for your time joining us here on Unknown, and we look forward to the president's comments on Tuesday, and hopefully we get a little more on his action on disclosure.
Thank you. And I should just comment in closing that are we alone is the most romantic question in science.
Very good. Good stuff, Dr. Avi Loeb. We appreciate it. And we appreciate you joining us here on Unknown.